Hello everybody, today we're doing Captain Titus, the greatest of them all, by PancreasNoWork. I think this lovely man is the lovely person you play in Space Marine 2. I will watch a review of that game, though I've heard just good things of it. I'll see. I'll watch a review, but probably not by PancreasNoWork. I think I'm gonna do the bricky one when I have time and everything like that. But today we've got some excellent PancreasNoWork. Captain Titus, the greatest of them all. Check him out. Subscribe to him. Like his video, because he does really good shit. Maybe do the same thing for me, though I don't do good shit. I watch other people's good shit. As long as they're okay with it, which I think he is. So, let's do this.
Who doesn't love themselves an Ultramarine? I'll tell you who.
Yes.
Idiots. People who think that just because they're the guys in the box that they're bland and
Ultramarines
boring,
are
that something being popular automatically means it's lesser
pretty
in
cool.
some way.
Not my favorite Space Marines. But they're like decent. And to be fair, I'm a stinky boy, and my favorite Space Marines are including Chaos Space Marines, because a Space Marine is a Space Marine. Yeah. Plague Marines, Death Guard, they look really cool.
Some people just refuse to acknowledge that sometimes a thing is the most popular for a reason.
Yes.
The Ultramarines were the best Space Marine Legion, and are the best Space Marine chapter ever.
I
and anything to
disagree,
the
but I can dig it.
contrary is cope so potent it could form its own chaos
Oh.
god. But I will admit, for some people at a certain point in time, I can understand kind of people not liking them a bit. A couple books here about the Ultramarines always
Yeah.
being the best,
I
a
heard
couple
there
books
was
there
some
about the Codex and Guilliman being more revered than the
fun
Emperor of
books.
Mankind. To those of us not in tune with Matt Ward's clearly correct taste of Ultramarine supremacy, the
Matt
chapter
Ward,
can feel a bit
so
off.
it was that guy.
Maybe a bit too stuck up, a bit too obsessed with the Codex, a bit too Mary Sue-y. But even then, there's still some Ultramarines everyone loves. Ain't it Thiel, that guy who made it so Space Marine sergeants paint their helmets red back
Never heard of him.
in the
Oh,
Horus
that's cool.
Heresy? Malum Kaido, who
He
was
is
a
a badass.
walking, screaming exterminatus, and I'm pretty sure he just got lost on his way to join either the Black Templars or World Eaters. And of course, the one and only Captain
World Eater
Demetrian
works.
Titus.
Titus.
He may have been demoted to Lieutenant come Space Marine 2, but
Oh,
he's
who
still a
cares?
captain in my heart. You may
The
be asking
captain is the
yourself,
captain.
isn't it better to wait till Space Marine 2 has been fully played through to make this video on the lore? Aren't there gonna be a million other videos about this guy
Yes.
all coming out within
But who cares?
Like a week?
Because this is PancreasNoWork and he does his stuff.
from each other? And to that, my answer is yes to both. But I've been doing this for
Yeah.
over 3 years, and I like to think I've mostly avoided jumping onto hype trains, so I'm letting myself have a YouTube cheat
It's
day
fair,
just this
it's
once.
Titus,
So listen to
he's
the
cool.
tale of Demetrian Titus, a man who I almost guarantee you didn't know the first name of before I
I did
just
not.
said it. But you know what's even better than a video about Titus? A video about Titus that can get you Space Marine 2 at
Oh.
a discount. And you can do so at Green
Never
Man
heard of the
Gaming,
site
the
in my
sponsor
life.
of this video. Green Man Gaming is an official retailer working with over 30
I would probably skip this, but there's a link in this description. The same link, assuming it still works, because sometimes it's timed, I'm not going to look that up. I'm going to put the link in my description too. So I don't know if you have any interest to visit Green Man Gaming, do it over this link. And I'm skipping the rest of it because it doesn't seem as interesting, and this discount on Space Marine 2 is most likely no longer there.
You can go grab yourself one of the most hotly anticipated
Yes.
Warhammer games to come out lately at a discount
don't
with
think you
Green
can
Man
anymore.
Gaming. So sign up, grab yourself that voucher, and go teach the world why the Ultramarines are the greatest
Mm.
of them all. Now then, time to hack and slash the enemies of glorious
Oh, yeah.
Ultramar. Demetrian Titus, who for the record I feel very uncomfortable calling by his first name, was born on the Ultramarine agri-world of Tarentus. Tarentus is a mildly interesting world, and feel free to take that as either a backhanded compliment or just simple observation. Everyone lives in these dome cities, and because the planet outside those domes is actually pretty dry, they have to set up moisture traps to capture all that they can. It makes me think of Tatooine if someone decided for some insane reason to build a farming community big enough to feed 500 worlds on it. It's part of a group of other agri-worlds very cleverly named the Three Planets,
Oh.
and at some point they were invaded by orcs before Marnius Calgar kicked
Okay.
them out. It got invaded by a demon prince at one point, and the population was
Yeah.
massacred, but the planet was
40K
eventually
things.
cleared back
Nice.
out. This concludes the history of Titus's
Yeah.
homeworld. I don't know why I bothered.
Yeah, not the most
Titus himself was
interesting.
the only child of a pretty normal family. No real standout qualities to him. Not too hot, not too cold, not incredibly rich, or anything really noteworthy.
Okay.
But he did end up being selected as a Space Marine aspirant for the Ultramarines'
Hey.
10th Company, and he performed
That's sick.
spectacularly during his trials. He was the kind of aspirant to pass every test and make all the instructors impressed with how cool of a dude he was.
And I
Sure
already love.
enough, he would pass the test and become one of the most decorated Marines in the entire chapter, although not without a few black marks on his record. As much as people do, and indeed I did, joke about Malum Cato being a Black Templar colored blue, the Ultramarines being angry as all hell isn't something unheard of. When they were the Warborn, they sometimes had issues with almost World Eaters levels of bloodlust, and to say Gilliman lost his temper a bit during Calth would be an understatement.
he went punching some things so they disintegrated. Yeah.
That second one was definitely under some extreme circumstances, but a Smurf turning purple with rage is something that happens. And sure enough, our boy Titus sometimes had issues keeping his temper under control. That sort of thing is only one that really becomes an issue if it actually harms people, though, and it seems Titus brutally murdered anything that got in his way long before it could take advantage of his tantrums. His backstory even takes some time to establish how Leandros, dickhead though he may be, wasn't completely in the wrong for reporting Titus to the Inquisition. Still like 99% in the wrong, but there's a little bit of basis for it. As it turns out, Nemirov, or whatever the Chaos Sorcerer from the first Space Marine who's completely forgettable compared to Grimskull, wasn't the first time Captain Titus resisted some warp shenaniganery. During a campaign against the Dark Gods, Titus and his squad faced off against a Chaos Sorcerer. Only Titus returned alive to tell of the tale. Now look, what I just said about Leandros already turned a good half of you away from the video. I know Titus is a good lad. We all know Titus is a good lad. But this is the Imperium. One dude conveniently walking away from a Chaos Sorcerer that killed everyone around him, seemingly untouched by the warp, is the kind of thing that sends alarm bells ringing in everyone's mind. And sure enough, Titus had to keep proving himself over and over again after this incident. But because he's a good lad, he was able to do it. Seemingly because in spite of the fact his video game is still a good few hundred years after this happens in universe, he still had his video game protagonist powers at this time. He'd charge in and destroy anyone daring to take on the Ultramarines, facing impossible odds and always bringing glory and honor to his chapter. With a record like he had, it's no wonder they put up with him despite any lingering suspicion. He was just too bad of a dude. 50 years down...
Being competent really helps with people keeping up with you.
The line from when he faced that Chaos Warrior, he ended up joining the Ultramarine 2nd Company, led by Severus Agaman. They were out and about doing Ultramarine things, fighting the enemies of mankind and being the best, when Macragge underwent some rather turbulent weather known as a Tyranid Hive Fleet invasion. Rushing to defend their home...
That's special.
World, they ended up instead joining Imperial forces and cleansing the rest of Ultramar of any lingering Tyranid remnants as the battle had ended by the time they finally arrived. There's another fun way his expanded backstory explains how he's so good at fighting aliens. Though he wasn't part of the Death Watch here, he was explicitly part of kill teams being used to hunt down Tyranids. Since there had to be some restructuring of the Ultramarines on account of their first company being devoured whole, Agaman became the captain of the first company, with Lucian Trajan becoming captain of the second, and Titus joining...
I will forget these names, by the way. No way I'm remembering that. I'm already not good with names, and also I'm Warhammer names.
His command squad. After that, we jump forward a century to the next big beat in Titus's life. And I hope you aren't too attached to Mr. Trajan from that one sentence I told you about him, because he's not making it past this one. The second company went to the planet of Beta Arcturus, and side tangent, I kept thinking for the love of God this was some important planet referenced somewhere else that was incredibly important to the story. Turns out it's not, it's just some system from Mass Effect. Anyways, Baelton was giving this place the old 1-2 buckle their shoe, so the second company went on in to save the day. Trajan and the command squad rushed in to battle the Autarch, while the ship they went on in engaged the Eldar ones. How exactly a single Space Marine ship was able to survive a concentrated assault by multiple Eldar ones is left unstated, although...
Well, in the end, the Imperium are still the main characters.
I believe it's safe to assume that Titus's video game protag powers are so strong they rubbed off on the ship itself. They didn't rub off on poor Trajan, though. While he did manage to kill the Autarch, this was all apparently a clever ruse. While it appeared the Xenos had been driven back, they had actually just faked it and captured a Space Marine in the process. You want to take a guess who that fella was? Do you think it Trajan? Or maybe another Ultramarines character, such as Cato Sicarius? Or perhaps even Marnius Calgar himself? Nope, they captured that dickweed Leandros. Rather than leaving him to die, however, Trajan gave temporary command of the second company to Titus and went to rescue him. The Eldar then sprung the trap, killed him, and Titus himself was forced to intervene and rescue Leandros. Now we know why that bastard was there to begin with in the first Space Marine game. Titus saw a Space Marine get captured by the Eldar and went, yeah, I want him on my command squad. Also, you know me, so I'm going to complain about elves now. I really don't think an autarch for a second company captain and some random marine is a fair trade. Now, if they sacrificed an autarch to capture Marnius Calgar, fair's fair. I can see that being considered an even trade, especially if they can grab the Soul Stone for later so they can
decently important people.
Shove the dude in a Wraith Lord. But the second company captain, even for a chapter like the Ultramarines, does not seem worth it to get an autarch killed for that. But his background does need to happen, and his background dictates he becomes the captain of the second company, and sure enough, upon the return to Macragge, Papa Smurf himself promoted Titus to the rank of captain of the second Ultramarines company. Titus never
for Papa Smurf, that's fantastic.
Actually wanted to climb the ranks like this. He just wanted to stay a sergeant and happily kill everything that got in his path for the rest of time.
Fair.
But despite his humility, he accepted the role so that he could do right by both his former friend Trajan and Calgar himself. After all, if Calgar says you're good enough, you're probably good enough. And indeed, good enough he was.
Who the
using
fuck
that
was Calgar? God, that was suck of names.
That same strike cruiser that fought the Eldar for some tactical brilliance, the Righteous Fury, he would come to be known as a great example of what an Ultramarine strives to be. An adaptable warrior and tactician who could take on whatever mission he was given. Many throughout the chapter truly viewed him as an exemplary Marine. Likely helping this was his friendship he had gained at some point with Sergeant Sidonis, the cool, grizzled old soldier guy from Space Marine. He helped cool down some of Titus's more rage-fueled decisions and allowed him to excel to even greater heights. All of this makes it even more shocking when Leandros pulled his BS stun, but let it never be said the Imperium and the people in it will ever give someone the benefit of the doubt. And eventually, after a nice and solid 150 years of service as captain of the second company, if I have my timeline right, Space Marine 1 happens. He's got 2 gold ones in Space Marine 1, which is 200 years, so that's about right. And you know, there's only so much I'll talk about here, because it's a fun video game you should play. You probably already
won't, because it's not my type of game, really, but it's probably still good.
Have, frankly. To briefly summarize, orcs are attacking the planet of Graia because that's what they do. It's a forge world that specializes in making titans, so there's not a chance in hell the Imperium is letting that one fall. And Titus goes in to save the day. The Codex Astartes does not support this action. Shut the fuck up, Leandros. Titus murders a whole lot of orcs, demons, traitors, is finished with this orc even though he ain't finished with Titus, and then he quick time events a Chaos Sorcerer to death. Leandros proves that looking a gift horse in the mouth is the Imperium's standard operating procedure, and hands over a Space Marine seemingly immune to chaos corruption to the Inquisition on a silver platter to be tortured. Now initially I figured that, hey, this Inquisitor seems like a bit of a cool guy. His name is Jerome Thrax, and at first I figured he was on Titus's side. He notices that Titus's injuries were chaos-inflicted, which made me think he was a somewhat rational guy. It seemed to me like he was going, hey man, it looks like chaos ran him over with a truck. Are you sure he's a heretic? I figured he was only taking Titus in because better safe than sorry, and he'd at worst get demoted from captain for appearance's sake and because Cato Sicarius needs to happen. But as it turns out, Thrax is not a fan of Space Marines, which is actually a surprisingly common viewpoint for anyone above the rank of the Standard Guardsman.
Yeah, Inquisitors especially, they don't really like them, because Space Marines are the type of people that might not do what they want them to do.
He was one of the first people to point to the Astral Claws around the time of the Badab War and go, these fellas ain't right, kill them with hammers. He was the sort of Inquisitor who would take prisoners first and ask questions never, which while in some ways does make him a bit better than the more trigger-happy ones, is also more monstrous because he's torturing them. And the Space Marine he captures, Titus included, are sure enough not only tortured both physically and psychically, but have a habit of never being released back to their home chapters. Marnius Calgar himself would repeatedly ask Thrax where the hell Titus was, but he was always ghosted by the Inquisitor. Eventually, the Ultramarines erected a statue of Titus in their fortress monastery, honoring what the many surely thought is just another fallen hero of the chapter. Titus would suffer this torture for over a century during this time, enduring it all the while. Eventually, freedom would come from an oh-so-perfectly ironic source. Inquisitor Thrax, on his way to deal with a chapter of Space Marines that had become corrupted by chaos, was himself possessed by a demon and slain by none other than the Grey Knights. Another Inquisitor from the Ordo Malleus found his secret stash of Space Marines and sent them to be tested for any impurities. Naturally, Titus passed with flying colors, but he's been changed a bit. Turns out a century of inquisitorial torture can make even the greatest of them all a bit jaded and bitter. No major spoilers for Space Marine 2, but Titus has become far more displeased towards the Inquisition in general.
Understandable.
Based on in-game cutscenes, he seems to have developed a habit of keeping things close to his chest and not sharing information he doesn't deem relevant to the mission. Hard to blame him for this too much. A bit more sadly than that is that Titus felt he could no longer return to the chapter. From his perspective, the Ultramarines never contacted him, and he took that as a sign he was no longer worthy to rejoin his brothers. Shame none of the Inquisitors or Grey Knights he doubtlessly spoke to at some point saw fit to inform him Thrax was just not passing the messages along, but that's Imperial bureaucracy for ya. Instead, he officially joined the Death Watch under the name Nullus as a Black Shield, allowing him to serve the Imperium in some capacity still. Not feeling he was worthy of even keeping his goddamn name, this was the best he could get.
Average Ultramarine inferiority complex?
Self-esteem issues aside, he naturally served under the Death Watch well until Space Marine 2 happens. And while I did say no spoilers for the game for the most part, tutorial spoilers don't count, and you can see he's a Primaris in the trailer. But if that bothers you, skip ahead with the video chapters.
No. I will watch a review later anyway, where we'll probably get a bunch of spoilers. Unless it's like a no spoiler review of Brit, which is possible, I guess.
Okay, good. I don't mean to sound rude, but it really isn't that mind-blowing. It's the story that needs to be part of a hack-and-slash murder-thon game. It's just there to get us to the killing. Titus and his Death Watch team were deployed to the planet Kataku, which was under a heavy assault by Tyranid forces. He was knocked off his ship during entry, the rest of his Death Watch team either dies right before or right after he arrives to link up with them, and he tries to solo a Carnifex, which goes exactly as well as you'd think it would. During this time,
he hasn't unlocked enough main character energy yet.
Chief Librarian of the Ultramarines, Varo Tigurius, had sensed his soul and ordered Titus's old cruiser to beeline it for him. They arrived just in time to save him, but since he was pretty brutally injured, the only choice to keep him alive was to have him undertake the Rubicon Primaris. Some people were iffy about him coming back, but Tigurius had sensed that he had no taint of chaos within his soul. And like I said with Calgar earlier, when the guy strong enough to talk to the hive mind of the Tyranids says you're in the clear, you're probably in the clear. Being a video game protagonist, he naturally survives the process, and the rest is gloriously rendered high-definition, murdery history. Something Tyranids, something Thousand Suns, something please stop trying to get me to buy Zangor's Games Workshop. It's not gonna happen. No. Why do people like this guy?
He's cool.
Well, saying anything definitive might get me yelled at, so I can tell you why I like him. For one, video game protagonist. You know an easy way to get someone to like a character? Have them control the dude for a fun campaign. Titus is the character of a game that, while certainly not revolutionary, was good fun and a nice little taste of the 40k universe. Indeed, learning about some very small basics of 40k through the first Space Marine isn't the worst of ideas, even if the only real takeaways you'd get are the Ultramarines can tear through orcs and demons like nobody's business. His feats are the kind of stuff that in a book would get people calling BS on him, but since we're butchering our way through the enemies as Titus, it's a different story. This isn't a criticism, just something I've noticed. Speaking of Ultramarines, though, while I'm not entirely sure on when
nobody gives a shit about the low accuracy of video games. Not even fucking Tolkien fans give a shit about low accuracy in video games. And those guys are getting mad when there's a low accuracy, trust me.
Exactly the height of Ultramarine glazing was. When Space Marine came out in 2011, it was certainly still in the minds of people. So fans of 40k might have initially expected Titus to be another boring Ultramarine character, going on and on about Gilliman and the Codex and all that crap, and then the game ends with him looking Leandros in the eyes and calling him a failure for refusing to do anything but look at the Codex for guidance. In the meta context of 40k at the time, that makes him a damn noteworthy character. And he's a pretty cool one, all things considered. He's humble, giving at least the slightest bit of care about guardsmen and battle brothers around him. He's highly driven, powering through all adversity against the odds. And he's seemingly immune to warp corruption, a neat plot hook that could go in a few different ways. Take your bets now, folks. Blank Titus, Imperial Saint Titus, or just plain willpower.
I take it. All of it. But are you ready for Captain Titus, the Emperor of Mankind? Yeah, I'm leaving, okay.
Sort of repeat a point though, him being a badass video game character undoubtedly helps. There are deeper, more well-written characters in 40k. There are more fun characters in 40k. Even ignoring anything like taste or how well-written you might perceive him as, there are plenty of characters with far more screen time than Titus could ever dream of. But when we see Titus, we see him as we play him. A space marine ripping his way through countless hordes of orcs, tyranids, and more. It's fun to watch Titus do his thing, in part because we're right there with him. Is it a bit of an unfair advantage compared to novel-only characters? Maybe,
Who
but I
cares?
personally think it's just a sign GW should really invest in making characters more fun like
They
that.
should invest in making more video games.
In fact, I'll just come out and say it. Bring back Matt Ward writing. Just have everyone get Matt Ward writing equally. If everyone has plot armor, no one has plot armor.
Yes.
Or at least the imaginary fights with our toy army dudes can be that much cooler. And that's Demetrian Titus. I still hate saying his first name, but he's a real cool dude.
Interesting.
Go play
first
Space
name.
Marine 2 now. It's out for everyone. Even the people who don't instinctively pre-order things with a skin of something they like on it. Thank you as always to my
Okay,
wonderful
don't
channel
do
members.
that, by the way. There's an end of video game joke. By the way, cool dudes, they found this guy. Sick shit.
I think Space Marine 3 should feature Titus teaming up with an Eldar and a kin to fight off a Genestealer cult on a planet in the middle of an orc invasion. Then the twist villain that's not actually a twist can be the Necrons, because for the love of God, when every single second act twist is, it was chaos the whole time, it stops being fun. And then in the third act, they reveal the entire thing was orchestrated by Albert Wesker. Not someone like Albert Wesker, just straight up Albert
I don't know
Wesker.
what that is. But don't forget the Elder Sex. It is really essential for this. Like, truly, it's just the most important thing there is, really. So, yeah. I hope you enjoyed that. I had a decent amount of fun with this. Hopefully, be more to come. If you enjoyed it, subscribe, yada yada, all that stuff. Next time.